What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Okay, so on this episode of Promises Made and Promises Kept, check this out, y'all. Trump signs executive order to dismantle the education department. Now, he's already done a pretty good job of doing this. He's had Linda McMahon, who... weird choice for the education secretary, but okay, sure, fine, whatever. I don't care. That's fine. Linda McMahon has already gutted the education department, right? Like, this is a department of, it's another USAID, if you will. All they do is they take care of grants and left-wing nonsense, right? Like, this is the problem. Okay, so this is the issue, and this is why the Trump administration is running up against so much obstruction, if you will. We've stated this for a very long time. Our institutions have been captured by the left. So how do you fix that? How do you resolve for this institutional capture, right? This ideological capture, if you will. How do you resolve for that? You can't just recapture it, like retake these institutions. No, that's not going to work. Plus, once again, that's not fair. That's one-sided. Now it's going to be captured by the right, which you don't want these institutions being political, right? You want these institutions being apolitical. So how do you do this? You destroy it. Just outright. Just obliterate it. Start over. Like, shutter it somewhere else. You know, shift everything to a new agency, build it back anew with some new regulations to try to keep the ideological capture out of these institutions. And I believe that's what the Trump administration is attempting to do. Now, a lot of left-wingers are like, oh, he's trying to consolidate power. Is that so? By dismantling his own federal government. He's consolidating power. Like, I love this argument from these people because it lacks merit. On its face, it just lacks merit outright because it makes no sense. It makes no logical sense that he's dismantling everything behind him, but yet he's consolidating power. He's an authoritarian, y'all. Yeah, right. What authoritarian in history has destroyed his own power, his own government? These people are outright insane. They are obstructionists on just for the sake of obstructionism. That is all they're doing. These activist judges on the circuit, we've talked about this over the past several days, trying to stop deportation flights when they're over international waters. That's absurd on its face. They're trying to revoke negotiations between Donald Trump and a foreign president of another country, right? It's getting ridiculous out here. These judges, they just crave power so much, right? So they think that they have equal power because we have co-equal branches, right? We're supposed to have co-equal branches here. You know, we're not supposed to have any branches of any government be more powerful than the other, which is already faulty because Congress ultimately has the most power of any institution in this country because they hold the strings to the purse. They can absolutely vote to cut funding for everything. They can shut down the government. They have the sole authority to shut down the entirety of the government. Just boom, outright. The judicial branch can't do this. The executive branch, obviously, can't do this. The Congress is the only one that can do this, right? So we technically don't have co-equal branches. Congress has a lot of power, y'all. It has a lot of power. And most people, they just don't recognize this because Congress doesn't use that power because they're scared to use that power. They would get cheers from people like me, just regular old Americans, based people. They would be cheered for doing some of these actions that I've talked about. You know, these activist judges want to act up. We know where their funding comes from, right? Comes from taxpayers. You pay their funding. And if Congress deems it necessary, they can shut down the funding to the judiciary branch. The entirety of the judiciary branch. They can shut down that funding. They can also write up legislation to shut down the funding for a specific district if they wanted to. They have the authority to do that. But, you know, there would be hell to pay, of course. But they could absolutely do that, y'all. But let's get into this because this is fascinating. And I just want to make it a point right off the top. If you look at the top of this here title screen right here, it says this was written by Rebecca Shabbat, Garrett Hockey, and Catherine Doyle. Why does it take 3 people to write one stinking article and it's not even that long? It's just an average article, y'all. But hey, that's just, something I pointed out I thought was interesting. But let's get into this right quick. President Donald Trump signed an executive order Thursday directing Education Secretary Linda McMahon to start dismantling the Department of Education. It sounds strange, doesn't it? Department of Education. We're going to eliminate it, Trump said while speaking in the East Room of the White House at a ceremony where he was flanked by children seated at school desks. Before signing the order, Trump turned to the children and asked, "Should I do this?" I'm sure they all said yes. Introducing McMahon, Trump said that hopefully she will be our last Secretary of Education. He vowed to find something else for you, Linda. That is funny because, he came into the presidency with every intention of shutting down the Department of Education. We don't need the Department of Education. I don't care what anybody argues. It's unnecessary, right? Like, if you want to give out student loans, Pell Grants, and stuff like this, sure, any department can do this. We can have the Department of Education just stay intact, as a matter of fact, because come to find out, he's not actually shutting it down. Doesn't have the authority to shut it down. It has to be shut down by Congress. But you keep it intact. You shutter it down to a point, right? And then you get it to where all they do is Pell Grants and college funding, because they do dole out, a lot of cash to these universities for research and all kinds of stuff, right? A lot of it, but once again, like getting back to the argument of why it's being shut down and not just recaptured, it's because it's been captured. And all these research programs, a lot of it sure might be science, but there's a lot of funding that flies right out the door that's just left-wing ideological nonsense, right? You can't just fire a bunch of people and eliminate that. You have to actually shutter the entire agency, break it down to its bare bones, just to get it out the door. Congressional approval would be needed to fully abolish the department. Trump said that he had hoped Democrats would vote in favor of legislation to do that. I hope they're going to be voting for it, Trump said of congressional Democrats, because ultimately it may come before them. Yeah, it sure will, and it's guaranteed they're not going to vote for it, right? If this was Obama shutting down the Department of Education, I imagine most Democrats would probably vote for this. But because it's Trump, they're not going to. They are absolutely not going to. Immediately after signing, Senator Bill Cassidy, the chair of the Senate Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee, said in a post on X that he will submit legislation to accomplish Trump's goal of shutting down the Department of Education as soon as possible. Congress established the Department of Education in 1979 during President Jimmy Carter's administration, and any effort to abolish the department would face major obstacles from Democrats in the Republican-controlled Senate, where 60 votes are required to overcome a filibuster and advance a measure to a final vote. The House Education Committee's top Democrat Rep. Bobby Scott called the executive order reckless and argued it would put low-income students, students of color, students with disabilities, and rural students at risk. But they never explain how. Like, this is something I always hear from Democrats. Oh, you're putting people at risk. How? Somebody explain. How is it putting these people at risk? Why is it only rural students and students of color? Why not white students? How come it's not putting them at risk, my guy? Like, is this just a giant virtue signal? Or is there something underlying beneath this that causes you to think this way? I think it's just virtue signaling, y'all. That's nothing but Congress seems to do, is just grandstanding. Like epic grandstanding, it's all they do. They don't really write much legislation, right? We're constantly, like, at least for the past I don't know, 25, 30 years, have funded the federal government through continuing resolution, which continuing resolution is essentially they take the legislation that was already legislated and they might make a few tweaks here and there, and then they just continue that. They just repass old legislation. That's what they've been doing. That's how the government has been funded for at least 30 years, since they balanced the budget back in the 90s. Under a Democrat, mind you. Yeah, Democrat did that. That is absurd in today's world. What Democrat is fiscally responsible? None. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt told reporters Thursday morning that the department would not be completely eliminated under the executive order, saying its critical functions would continue, including the enforcement of civil rights laws and oversight of student loans and Pell Grants, which that's all that's needed anyway. That was the only reason it was created in the first place. The Pell Grants, for one, student loans, sure, civil rights. Yeah, for students, yeah, I get that. I totally get that. And that needs to stay. And, not shutting down, actually shutting it down. Sure, fine, whatever. But shut down the vast majority of this thing, because, once again, it's been ideologically captured. And, we need to root out some of this ideology out of the government, y'all. The Department of Education will be much smaller than it is today, Leavitt said, adding that the order directed McMahon to greatly minimize the agency. So when it comes to student loans and Pell Grants, those will still be run out of the Department of Education. The executive order also will not affect department activities aimed at meeting the educational needs of students with disabilities or Title I funding, which goes to school districts with a high proportion of students from low-income families, a senior administration official told NBC News on Wednesday. And this is what I imagine that Democrat from earlier was alluding to. But once again, they don't tell you these things. You've got to figure these things out for yourself, right? So a lot of this funding, they do fund a lot of low-income public schooling around the country if they need more funding for whatever, because of tax code or whatever, population. If they don't get enough funding to fund the students, blah, 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 you get it. They get funding from the federal government. I don't really see much of a problem with this, although, I can see how this can be abused, and it probably is being abused, but, that's just speculation on my behalf. The text of the order was not immediately published after the White House signing ceremony, while several Republican state attorneys general and governors were in attendance. Trump publicly acknowledging Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, Iowa Governor Kim Reynolds, Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton, and others. Ken Paxton is based, y'all. Polling on eliminating the Department of Education shows the move is broadly unpopular, due in large part to opposition from Democrats and independents. And you know why this is, right? Like they put out this poll, hey, do you want to shut down the Department of Education? And most people have no idea what the Department of Education does. As a matter of fact, I don't know half of what the Department of Education does. And I think that's why it needs to be shut down. But the fact that most people don't know this, you're going to poll a bunch of people and ask them something they don't know anything about, right? They can make some guesses in their head. Of course, they're like, no, that makes no sense, because right quick, when you think Department of Education, they must oversee curriculum, right? Right? No. As a matter of fact, they don't. That is for the states to decide. Right? And largely, it's even on a smaller scale than that. But you do have guidelines and stuff like that. But for the most part, the states decide curriculum. So they have no control over curriculum whatsoever. They pretty much, the most of what they do is give out money. That's pretty much what they do. They take your taxpayer dollars and give it out. Right? So when we have ideological capture, that makes it a problem for taxpayers, because now they're doling out money to programs that most people would not agree with. but most people don't know that they're giving this money out. Like, I had no idea that USAID was funding most of the stuff USAID was funding, right? Now, I knew about USAID and what they did for the most part. I did not know the extent to which USAID was funding left-wing ideologically driven nonsense, right? And the Department of Education is the same way. Most of our institutions, our governmental institutions, are the same way. This is why we're getting so much recourse, if you will, to every single Trump action, every single bit of his agenda. He got an overwhelming support he got the popular vote, for crying out loud, which is absurd for a Republican. Donald Trump, one of the most controversial figures in U.S. politics history, to win the popular vote. That, to me, plus the shift to the right, that map that I show all the time, which is like 87% of counties in the United States shifted to the right. That's a mandate, folks. That is a mandate. And Democrats, the minority, are obstructing at every single turn. And most of it is destroying the Democratic Party. Most of it is destroying them because they are obstructing the popular mandate, folks. That is what they are doing. Don't let the corporate press and any of these Democrats lie to you. These Democratic pundits are lying to you about a lot of this. They just tell you, oh, he's shutting down the education department. It's stupid. Explain how that is stupid exactly. Why do they say it's stupid? Oh, it's because it's funding their pet projects. Of course they're going to back the Department of Education. Nonsense is what I say. Nonsense. A Quinnipiac survey conducted March 6th through 10th found that 60% of registered voters opposed the plan, while 33% were in favor of it. Among Democrats, just 1% are in favor of the move, while 98% oppose it. The survey had a margin of error of plus or minus 2.8 percentage points. At her Senate confirmation hearing last month, McMahon acknowledged the need to coordinate with Congress to close the department. Certainly, President Trump understands that we'll be working with Congress, she said in response to a question from Cassidy. We'd like to do this right. We'd like to make sure that we are presenting a plan that I think our senators could get on board with and our Congress could get on board with that would have a better functioning Department of Education, but certainly does require congressional action. With Trump's executive order, however, it appears the administration, to some extent, is sidestepping lawmakers. McMahon said on Sirius XM's The David Webb Show on Tuesday that as they wind down her department, administration officials want to ensure they are providing states with best practices and tools that they will need. See, I would have to kind of disagree with that to a certain extent because I don't believe they're really sidestepping Congress because they're not really shutting it down, are they? No, they're not. They're just shuttering it, for the most part, down to its bare bones, down to the bare minimum. Right? There is no requirement from Congress to expand and bloat any of these federal agencies. Right? There is no requirement for them to grow nor shrink. So they can absolutely shrink it down to the bare minimum if they want to. That is at the discretion of the executive branch. Because it's an executive branch agency. They have discretion for the most part. So I don't know if I agree with that or not. I pretty much don't agree with that. I don't believe they're sidestepping anybody. Right? If they were actually trying to shut it down, sure. Because you can't. In her justification for eliminating the department, McMahon added, I think it's important to note what the Department of Education does not do. The Department of Education doesn't educate anyone. It doesn't hire teachers. It doesn't establish curriculum. It doesn't hire school boards or superintendents. It really is to help provide funding so that the states themselves can help with their own programs. But that creativity and innovation has to come from the state level. That's what I explained earlier. McMahon and the administration have already taken steps in recent weeks to gut the department by cutting the workforce nearly in half. NBC News recently reported that state officials and lawmakers have said they're not prepared to take on the full responsibility of education policy. They already do. What are you talking about, NBC News? And Trump's latest order will likely be met with more legal challenges. Of course, the obstructionists are going to obstruct. Of course they're going to do that. These people want you to be stupid. They want you to shut up and sit down and pay your taxes. That's all they want. They don't want you listening to videos like this with people with voices like mine saying the Department of Education needs to go the way of the dinosaur. And I don't mean an asteroid come down and just destroy the building, right? That's not what I mean. It needs to go extinct. Right? If you want a Department of Education that issues Pell Grants and oversees student loans, sure, fine, whatever. We have a DOJ for civil rights. If they want to do that as far as students are concerned, look, I'm just fine with that as well. That's still a small department that doesn't have much funding for itself, in other words. Sure, a lot of funding is going to go through that department, but, we need these programs, right? They're not necessary at all. I think the Department of Education should absolutely put together a team to go around making sure that people aren't getting student loans that they aren't going to use. In other words, making people understand what they're getting themselves into when they get a student loan for a higher education. Make sure that you're going to use that higher education. Otherwise, it's a complete waste. You're putting yourself in debt for no reason. This is a big problem in this country. And that's also part of the Department of Education's problem. They're just doling out all these student loans, forgiving them on your dime, and just saying, screw it. Like, they got that education for absolutely no reason. It was a waste of time, a waste of money, and we all have to back that up. It's absurd, y'all. Labor and Civil Rights Group issued statements Wednesday blasting the administration for the move. National Education Association President Becky Pringle said Wednesday that the administration's actions will hurt all students by sending class sizes soaring, cutting job training programs, making higher education more expensive and out of reach for middle-class families, taking away special education services for students with disabilities, and gutting student civil rights protections. All lies. All of it's lies. It's nothing but fear-mongering. Because as we know, the Department of Education does not do any of those things, right? And what they're shuttering down to still provides the funding. Gutting student civil rights protections? Are you kidding me? No, that program is continuing. As a matter of fact, these people are lying. Don't let them lie to you. NAACP President Derek Johnson called the order unconstitutional, adding that the rule of law doesn't seem to matter to Trump. No, not when it's adjudicated by NAACP presidents. It sure doesn't. Only Congress can establish or abolish an executive agency, Johnson said. You notice what they're doing here, what NBC is doing? They're adding in all these statements from all these people that have no idea what they're talking about just to make you believe. Like, if you were to read this, like, all these people, right? The NAACP president is saying, oh, this is unconstitutional. Like, this is meant, once again, to make you think that if you're Make America Great Again type of person, if you're a MAGA man or a MAGA person, that you're on the wrong side of history. But I tell you folks, right now, today, you are not. You are not. History will bear this out. These are all the right moves. Trump is not just seeking to shut down an agency, he is deliberately dismantling the basic functions of our democracy, one piece at a time. And you love this, once again, to add to what I was saying a second ago. Like, come on. They're all lying here because they're not shutting down the Department of Education. Just saying. They are lying. This is a dark day for the millions of American children who depend on federal funding for a quality education, including those in poor and rural communities with parents who voted for Trump. And once again, folks, they're not shutting it down completely. They're just gutting the ideological capture, right? The ideological capture of the Department of Education is cancerous. What do we do, folks, when we have a cancerous tumor somewhere on our body? We don't try to just keep it there and ignore it and say, oh, well, it's necessary. That's nature taking its course. We don't do that, do we, for a cancerous tumor? No, we go see a doctor and they, make a plan, have a surgery, and you excise that tumor. That is what the Trump administration is doing, folks. And Democrats are in love with status quo right now. They just want to keep everything the same. They don't want any disruptions. And plus, this gives them all the ammunition they need to virtue signal their way into re-election. That is what is going on here, essentially, is what is going on. They are just saying, oh, it's going to hurt these people, it's going to hurt these people. But think about, is it really, like, now that we know what the Department of Education doesn't do, and it seems to align exactly with what everything they said that eliminating the Department of Education was going to bring. Yeah, it doesn't do any of those things already. So, these people are just blatantly lying to you, right? And what's funny about that is, once again, this is meant to manipulate you, but all it takes is a keen eye and a little bit of knowledge to read through this thing and figure out, like, we get the news here and we figure out, hey, look, they're lying to us about this. It is utter ridiculousness, and I'm running long on this one, but I want y'all to let me know what y'all think about all this down in the comment section. It blows my mind, y'all. It really does. The extent that the corporate press and Democrats and all these obstructionists will go to virtue signal and obstruct Donald Trump just for the sake of destroying their country. Because that's exactly what they're doing. Slowly but surely destroying this country. Step by step. Piece by piece. And Donald Trump is trying to prevent that, y'all. That is exactly what is going on. But y'all let me know what y'all think. That's all I got on this one. I want to thank everybody for watching. And y'all try to have a good day. Stay legitical. Don't forget to smash that like.